again, and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, May 12th, 2016. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com. And of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. Guys, no time to waste this week. There's a heck of a lot going on in the world of MMA. Breaking news, a ton going on once again. And truth be told, Monday afternoon, I was kind of thinking like, this is kind of a quiet week right now. Maybe we'll talk 198, sort of preview that card. And then a lot changed on Tuesday. Now, I want to start with this UFC sale talk. And just to go with the timeline, let's start with Tuesday evening. ESPN's Darren Rovell comes out with a report that the UFC is in quote-unquote advanced talks to sell to a bidder, right? He reported that there were 4 at the time. That's now been dwindled down to 3. And now the talk is that there are a couple front runners based out of China. Now, that's not what I want to get your take on just yet. The next day, actually that night, Dana White speaks to several media members and says this is absolutely not true. The UFC is not for sale. Pretty much it. That was the statement.
And Darren Rovell hates facts.
And Darren Rovell hates facts. That's right.
It's allergic to facts.
Kudos to Darren. Yes. Kudos to Darren for continuing to, back up his report. He's continued to add to it. But where it gets interesting is yesterday, Dana White does some pretty big radio shows. The Dan Patrick Show, Kevin and Bean in Los Angeles, Colin Cowherd's show. And here we are, of course, UFC 198 week. It's a big week for the UFC, but the majority of the talk was about this story. And I thought Dana's responses in regards to this story, he continued to say the UFC is not for sale, but he did say, but if we were in talks, I wouldn't talk about it right now. And by the way, if someone has $4 billion, I'm open to talking about selling the UFC. I thought his responses were fascinating, and in particular in that Dan Patrick interview. So what I want to ask you right off the top is, what did you make of Dana's responses? For an individual who has done less media as of late, for a guy who could have said, look, this story came out, I know we're supposed to promote 198, but I don't think it's in our best interest to talk about this, or maybe I'm just going to come out and say, absolutely, point final, the UFC is not for sale. That's not what he did. My impression was his non-confirmation kind of felt like a confirmation, and it felt like he was kind of telling the world, like, hey, we may be at the goal line here. You better step up if you're interested. That's the way I viewed it. What'd you think?
Yeah, pretty close to that. And also the arrangement was, there was no denial of one potential arrangement. Dan Patrick asked him explicitly, okay, if the whole thing's not for sale, is it partially for sale? And Dana White was like, understandably, because I think he didn't know exactly what to say without potentially breaching NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, or whatever the case may be. And then he went on to say, we are looking to grow. We're looking to expand. Those were his words, the company. And he also sort of inserted himself into the conversation about whether or not he's done. No, he still loves doing this. If Lorenzo got out and the Fertitta brothers got out, they would all get out together. So he definitely dropped a lot of hints. Look, there's too many media reports to say this is false. Now, the actual complexion of it, I don't know, but I completely agree. You always, no matter what promoter it is, Bob Arum, Oscar De La Hoya, Dana White, lying is a requirement of that job. That's a fact, and that's annoying for us, but it's a requirement. So you always have to be like, what are they doing here? But for him, to your point, to go out and do a tour about it is completely different than just telling, let's say, a big reporter like Kevin Iole, no, this is not true. Not that he would use Kevin necessarily, but I'm just making a point. I don't know exactly that it means we're at the goal line, step up. That's certainly, I think, a totally reasonable interpretation. My sense is, and we'll get to this later, that they're going to sell a portion of it. But it was definitely their way of semi-announcing to the world, the train has left the station.
Yeah, and this made big news everywhere. What did you take?
Well, I thought that his initial response, it wasn't just denying the Dan Rovell report, it was attacking Rovell. He actually, I'm trying to think how this was out. Was he tweeting to somebody a link to a previous story that Rovell got hoaxed by some teenager or something like that?
Dave Diebert out of Canada tweeted that he asked Dana about this story, and Dana's response was sending him this link.
Right, so this was not just saying, no, we're not for sale. I mean, and also even the language, it was overblown. So overblown to me doesn't mean we're not selling. It may mean we're not selling the whole carnival. You know,
Right.
we may be selling part of it or whatever. And to Luke's point, at this point, Dana White is not going to come out and say, yeah, you know, you got us. We're for sale. He's going to say whatever it is that's going to try to quash the story, because that's what he does. He doesn't want the story to be out there.
Or use the story to whatever effect he wants the story to be used.
because I don't really
right?
feel like he squashed the story. You know what I mean? Like he
didn't at all. And if there are 4 different bidders, or there are 4 different companies that are looking into this, and he's basically, how would you leverage one against the other? How would you do that? And going on platforms and not shooting it down, but actually reiterating it. Each one of those interviews you mentioned, that $4 billion figure, which that's what stood out to me too, was just that, it was basically the same language, almost like he said with Floyd Mayweather. Hey, if Floyd wants to talk to me, here I am. Give me a call. We can talk about this. Similar to that, but he was basically just saying, if somebody really wants to offer $4 billion, let's hear it. I'd love to talk to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in my mind, you have 4 different entities, and you're throwing out a number. To me, that was the play.
Look,
Which he changed later to $6 billion too, by the way.
yeah.
Did he really?
Yes,
Okay,
he
I
did.
didn't hear that part.
If James Dolan, the owner of the Knicks and Rangers, was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday.
Great guy.
One of my favorite owners in sports. And Dan was like, hey, are the Knicks for sale? I'm pretty certain right now he says, no, they're not for sale.
Right.
There's no number. I want to be the owner of the Knicks and Rangers.
Right.
That's not what Dana White said yesterday. He said, I'm open to talking for the right price. And to me, that's super fascinating. This reminded me.
What was your boys, Ted DiBiase used to say?
Every man has a price.
There you go.
There you go. You know that.
I do not know who this
The $1
gentleman
million
is.
champion. Wow, I didn't bring up the wrestling reference. Kudos to you.
That's the last time I watched wrestling.
You're fired.
I don't know if you guys remember this story, but this is what yesterday reminded me of. It felt like deja vu all over again. Do you remember? Okay, there was a scrum. I was at UFC 131 in Vancouver. Any of you guys at that one?
Is that the Carwin JDS?
That's right. And there was a scrum before, when he would do those Thursday afternoon scrums after a press conference, where earlier that day or the day before, the Wall Street Journal came out with a story that the UFC was very close to striking a deal with NBC to be their new television partner, and as a result of that, G4 would become the UFC network. Do you remember this story?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Dana White came out and said, this is absolutely not true, that we're not in talks with NBC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this was literally 2 months before the Fox deal happened. And when the Fox deal happened, at that press conference, Dana White said, you know what's interesting? The whole Fox deal happened after the Wall Street Journal story came out.
Hold on, and I distinctly recall he questioned the credibility of the reporting from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and I laughed because I was like, if they can't get it right, no one can get it right.
So what he said was, Fox read this story and said, wait a minute, NBC's at the goal line, we got to talk to these guys, and then they struck a deal. This reminded me of the exact same thing.
Right.
Story comes out, it's denied, and then a deal may come. You know what I mean? It felt like the exact same thing all over again. So to me, once again, it felt like a story came out by a very reputable reporter from a very reputable outlet. You don't need me to tell you that. He comes out and says...
And also, let's just be real, how did he get that information? Someone on the inside gave it to him. Who on the inside gave it to him? I don't know. And I'm not, by the way, this is common in media. People leak to the media all the time. This is not some surreptitious hacking thing. Someone gave it to him. He's not... he did not make this up. That would be a crime of some capacity. This is well-sourced
You can't get this story wrong.
No,
you cannot get
look how
this
many
story wrong.
details there are. And some of the details he's changed. Okay, fair enough. But the basic picture is still there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of story that you always, as a reporter, need to be 1,000% sure. This is the kind of story that you need to be 10,000% sure, in my opinion. And, there is some hedging going on. Look, it may not happen, and that's true. It may not happen. And is it partial? Is it full? We don't know. But I just felt like yesterday's media day, if you will, and again, you look at those interviews, how many questions were asked about 198? I mean, you could say that's why it was set up. The 2 questions I saw were, tell me about this card, just kind of a throwaway, and what's up with Anderson Silva? That doesn't really sell the pay-per-view. The guy had gallbladder surgery.
Which interview are you talking about?
Oh, well, the best one I thought was the Dan Patrick one, but it was the same in every single interview.
I know Kevin and Bean asked about we're dumb.
Did they?
Yes.
Okay.
We're dumb.
That was an interesting. Yeah, I was going to say.
That's what they said.
There wasn't a lot of talk though about the Damian Maia Matt Brown fight, which I know you're very excited about. So I don't know. Maybe we've gotten into this habit because Dana has been so accessible to us. And I find him a very fascinating guy to cover. Like, you almost kind of feel like you have to be like a Dana code reader, if you will.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That to me is an interesting thing, and I thought there were a lot of signs.
I mean, how long have you followed the sport? You've been around it for a long time. You've been around it. We've all been around a long time. You sensed this for a long time. But you're able to recall UFC 131. You're able to recall that. And I feel like that's where we're at. There's so many people who've seen the patterns of how Dana operates through the media and everything for so long. You obviously are going to take everything with, I don't want to, like you said, there's a certain amount of disclosure that you have to keep.
Sure.
There's a certain, salesmanship you got to keep and all those things. You understand that about him, and you understand his own mannerisms a little bit. And through the course of time, some things that used to happen, I felt like we all had to learn together because nobody really knew how they would operate under these big shifts of things happening. But this particular one, I felt like that was what we saw too, was just, well, here's Dana sort of doing this tap dance routine on 3 different platforms. That has to mean something. So it was a little bit of a telling, something tipping me off.
Yeah, and also he's been reduced. He's reduced his role as a public guy, and even during the whole Conor McGregor, is he in UFC 200? Is he out of UFC 200? That whole thing, he pretty much laid low during a lot of that stuff, which was a pretty, there was a lot of upheaval there, and he did not weigh in, or if he did weigh in, he weighed in very complimentary toward McGregor. So he really didn't kind of, jump in with guns a-blazing like he did with this one, at least initially. And then after the guns were a-blazing, after that stopped, then he goes to some media members, very prominent ones, and tries to get the message that he wants to get across. I mean, that's that's it's kind of a newer version of what Ben White does. Instead of just the old feisty guy, he's kind of
amazing at it. If you really step back and see all the different ways he's handled each thing that's came up through the course of time, like he says, he can't put his foot on the ground in the morning without bad things happening. If you just look at all the things he's dealt in and how he's dealt with them, the guy's a brilliant crisis management mind. I mean, I think he really thrives on curveballs and having to sort of think on his feet and doing that sort of thing. This comes out, okay, how do we combat? I know, I'll go, you know what I mean? It's just, he's been brilliant that way throughout his whole career.
And for the record, I don't think he did anything wrong yesterday. I actually think it was good business to let the world know that, hey, if you want to talk, let's talk. Also, it was interesting in that Dan Patrick interview when he asked him about, will the Fertittas try to buy the Raiders and bring them to Las Vegas? Notice how many times he said, no, that's not true. That's not true. He was adamant about that one. About the UFC stuff, not as adamant. So let's talk. If they do sell, whether it's partial, a majority, the full thing, and again, we can only really guess here.
It's very speculative.
What do you think this means for the sport? Because the major response that I was getting, that was it. Like, the response to the story was questions. What does this mean for us? Yeah. Fighters texting. Fighters, like, everyone just seems to be very worried. Right. What do you think happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of uncertainty breeds nervousness, right? So this is not any moment but an uncertain one, it seems like, partly because we're dealing in the dark and groping for a light switch, and there's very few to be found. For me, look, I'll just put forward what appears to be the most likely based on what I'm hearing from other reporters, and just trying to make sense of it all. If you look at the dominant 2 players, China Media Capital and then the Wanda Group, what's interesting to me is, man, you can say whatever you want about that Flash Entertainment sale, the 10% one. Maybe that was just for a cash infusion, but I was looking up and I remember that they had Rich Franklin and Benson Henderson in 2012 go down to India and to announce Tough India, and it never happened, right? I feel like that Flash Entertainment, I'm not saying the partnership or the sale of 10% to them was a bust, but did they really break into China? Did they really break into India? Did they even really break into the Middle East? I'm sure they have better television deals. I know for a fact they do in India, but it wasn't a robust entry. The people behind the Wanda Group and CMC, these are the heaviest hitters in all of China. The guy behind Wanda is the richest guy in all of China. The guy behind CMC, this guy has investment from Jack Ma. He's called the Rupert Murdoch of China. They have investments in Western entertainment properties that you cannot possibly imagine. He is the real deal Holyfield. And I feel like these guys getting money offers from them, whether it's partial and in full, and I think it's partial because if you look at all their Western investments, for example, the guy from CMC, their whole bit is buying some portion of Western properties and making it palatable in part to Chinese audiences. I don't buy that they want to take the whole thing over because it's essentially an American product, globalized, but whatever. So my guess is that what Dana White said in that Dan Patrick interview, that they're not ready to check out. They're ready to take some money. They could potentially, if it's a $4 billion valuation, which by the way would make them more expensive than the most expensive soccer club in all the world, Real Madrid. Real Madrid's only valued at $3.6 billion. If they can get $4 billion, that would put them above all football clubs in the world, soccer clubs. I feel like it's a partial sale because even at 20%, that would be $800 million. Do you know what the UFC could do with $800 million on cash? I think that's the way that's probably going to go. But who's going to buy and how it's going to look? I guess we'll find out.
A lot of people wondering, what does this mean for Dana White? Like, a lot of fans were asking, and even in these interviews, he was being asked, like, are you going to leave? And to me, it's silly to think that some company, whoever they may be, is going to buy this thing and say, okay, Dana and Lorenzo, thank you for your time. We'll see you later. A, there's got to be a non-compete. Look at the Strikeforce sale. Coker had to stay on for 5 years. He didn't do much, but he still had to stay on. So they don't want him to go start another league. And B, who knows the UFC better than Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta? They're not going to say goodbye to him. So even if something does happen, I don't foresee them leaving anytime soon. He's in his mid-40s. This guy's not going to retire now.
Yeah, and think about not the end of the road, which, you know, if they were to sell and go off. Think about the beginning of the road. $2 million with 2001. These guys were businessmen, yes, but they were fight fans. I mean, that's part of, as much as the Fertittas and Dana White are businessmen now, they also grew up as fight fans, and so the entire operation is run with that in mind. And now if you take them out of it, and you're just getting guys with a load of money, as Luke's pointing out the deep pockets. That's not necessarily going to be a good thing for anybody who pays attention to the sport. Just having money is not really the thing. You need to have people who care about the sport, not just thinking of it as a product, but the people who watch this show and who buy the pay-per-views. These are people who really deeply care about this sport and really love it. And as much as we like to sometimes criticize the way Dana White does this or that and criticize the UFC for this or that, bottom line is those guys started off as lovers of fighting, just like the fans, and losing those guys would have, I think, a real significant and not necessarily a positive effect on the sport.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Dana White's involvement of what he's been doing on every level, from a macro level to the micro level, I mean, the basic minutia of the fight game, how he goes into everything. He looks at, listens to people's walkout music. He approves every little thing that goes on. He looks at every piece of video beforehand. He is to a fault. And I think that he's been that guy for so long. It is almost impossible for me to imagine, first of all, the UFC without him, but secondly, that he would allow that to be the case. I feel like this is his baby. This is something that is, as it built, he has it in his own self-contained universe, I guess you'd say, like just everybody answering to him essentially. And how did he get there? He got there because he had a couple of guys with deep pockets who were ready to see what he could do with this. They've brought it to this level. I just cannot imagine, to be completely honest, him stepping away from it at this point. Not when you get to the point where some of the major hurdles that we're getting, like broadcast TV deal, Reebok deal, like they talked about these things going, and basically infusing into the mainstream, like the things that they've accomplished. But to get to that level, and I know that also adds to the value of getting rid of it at this point or selling at this point, I just can't imagine that he would do that. I just don't think that his passion is real. We used to see him in the scrums, he'd get angry at certain things. His passion is very real. How he cares about the sport. It might get so big that he doesn't know every little nook and cranny anymore. He's not able to look everywhere and sort of address every single issue. But his passion for the sport has never been in question. And I just feel like there's no way that he's going to. I can't imagine a scenario where he's not involved with it, regardless of one way or the other, which way they go.
$4 billion, though, man. Put it in your pocket.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
I mean, this guy. Look, the Fertittas were going to be rich no matter what. If the UFC had gone belly up, they still would have had all that money. For the Red Rocks resort casinos and the gaming company.
Going to buy the Palms too. So
right.
It came out this week.
And for a fraction of a price,
Right.
they could have been a few years ago. So credit to them for that. But look, the point being is this: Dana White, if the UFC had failed, what was he going to be? Maybe a boxing promoter. Maybe he would have been an entrepreneur in some other combat sports related thing. Who knows exactly? But the guy spent the last 15. What's the great achievement of his life? I can't remember that television show he had. Epic failure. Epic.
The boxing one?
Yeah, disaster. Not that he doesn't know what he's doing in television necessarily, but the point being is, in life you're going to find that when you look back on your achievements, maybe you'll have a whole litany of them. But generally, and this was a massive one, obviously, for everyone involved, he made his life's work telling the world about MMA, trying to get it palatable to mainstream audiences, and particularly that brand, the UFC. The idea that even if he wasn't going to be, I can see him not being involved I mean, if he is a mortal human being, eventually he will not be. But the idea that he would just hand it off to someone who had no core competencies in this, that to me sounds completely outrageous. I don't think they would ever do that. So, A, I don't think he's going anywhere. But B, even if he did, they're going to leave the keys to the car with not some teenager. They're going to give it to an experienced driver.
Well, you know, I literally cringe when I listen to these sports talk radio shows, these mainstream interviews with Dana White. And
they know MMA so well.
The one part that kills me is when they call him a commissioner. When they say, there is no commissioner.
But that's your thing. You always talk about that.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts because these men understand what a commissioner is. They know what David Stern or Roger Goodell or now Adam Silver in the NBA, they know what their role is. So to compare them to Dana White, all they're saying is, you have no idea who Dana White is in our sport. It actually hurts me inside. So it bothers me so much. Don't these people have producers to tell them otherwise? Anyway.
Yeah, they do. They just don't listen.
So what happens here is, like, when the LA Clippers were owned by Donald Sterling and he had to sell them to Steve Ballmer, the train essentially kept moving, because in the NBA you have a GM, you have a president of basketball operations, et cetera, et cetera. If you sell the UFC, Dana White just can't leave the next day like Donald Sterling did, because, yeah, there are matchmakers, there's Joe Silva and Sean Shelby who get, but he's a part of that train. Like, he can't just say goodbye. You know what I mean? Like, there needs to be a transitional period. So anyone thinking that if this gets announced in July or something in the summer and they're just going to disappear, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself if you think that it's going to happen like that. And I just think that, going back to your point about Lorenzo and Dana being fight fans, yes, it is true. But let's not forget the Fertittas were casino moguls long before they were part of the UFC. And as Dana White said yesterday, Lorenzo and his brother Frank are huge football fans. I think that they would be very happy owning an NFL team. I think they would be ecstatic owning an NFL team. They have a passion for the NFL. Dana likes the NFL, he likes sports. I don't think he shares that same passion. He doesn't want to be an NFL owner. So what I'm saying is, I feel like they're the kind of businessmen that could move on if need be and do something else. I don't know if he can move on and find that same passion every morning and drive and you know, just that oomph every single day to sell something else, because he truly does love this. You get what I'm trying to say?
So
I feel like there's a distinction.
You're saying that Commissioner White is going to be staying around.
No, I'm not saying that.
I actually think that the whole Fertitta's NFL thing is a little bit odd, because the NFL has rules about its ownership, and right. I believe that if you have anything at all to do with gambling,
that's true.
You're not going to be owning an NFL franchise
or other sports leagues
for years.
Or sports properties.
Right.
Anyway.
I mean, I know things change, and there's a whole new breed.
No.
There was a time, and up until now, when there was the idea of putting a professional sports franchise in Las Vegas was not going to happen.
Sure.
And now I know that I keep reading that some of the NFL owners are softening on that, and maybe
the NHL as well.
maybe they're willing to do that. But in terms of having it be a locally owned franchise owned by guys who own casinos, I think that'd be a little bit of a stretch.
They would probably have to sell the casino if they want to get into the NFL.
Yeah.
But he has said that he's interested in it.
But you know what? If Commissioner White were to move over to the NFL,
Stop saying that.
He's not appreciating that, Jim. I was just going to say that, you know, I don't know. With Dana White, I just feel like you're looking at a guy who, for years we were talking about him being the face of the UFC, the star of the UFC, the celebrity of the UFC. And I still feel like, to an extent, that's true. We've talked about a million times how some of these obsequious sort of radio personalities or whatever, these shows, how they talk to him. He likes that. He likes to know that these who he has where, who he can do what through and why not. It's his own world. I just feel like he is the celebrity of the UFC. He's the spirit of the UFC. He's the reason that we, you know, there's a lot of things we sort of pay attention to everything he says with the UFC, right? Everything that is Dana White related. So I just can't imagine. I know I'm sort of reiterating, but I just can't imagine that he would be able to turn that off. Really,
Yeah.
that's really the point. His problems get bigger and bigger because there's more scrutiny. But I feel like he's been up to the task, and you know, it's one of those things. Like, for the most part, he's been up to the task, and he's I think he enjoys the challenge of each thing as it comes along.
Times are changing, though.
That's true.
Back in the day, I feel like people were buying UFC pay-per-views because it was a UFC pay-per-view. But I think that because there's so many UFC pay-per-views, people are picking and choosing. I mean, if the reports, and if Conor McGregor is to be believed, UFC 197 didn't do gangbusters on pay-per-view. Perhaps because Daniel Cormier and John Jones weren't fighting each other on the card. It's more about stars now more so than ever, in my opinion. I want to ask you guys this, though. Is this, if you are the owners of the UFC, is this a good time to sell? with some of the things coming down, like with the TV deal yet to expire, but you probably can command more. I think it's fair to say that the UFC is more valuable to Fox than Fox is to the UFC these days. The UFC is not any more mainstream than it was 4 or 5 years ago. Being on Fox, like the big Fox channel, it doesn't really change all that much. Look how many times Demetrius Johnson headlined Fox shows, 3 in a row. Is he any bigger of a star as a result of that? So I actually think that the UFC did more for FS1 and Fox than vice versa. So my question is, with that deal coming up, with other deals around the world, in play and coming up as well, with the Reebok deal and all that stuff, with Fight Pass doing what it's doing, and also with all this stuff like the lawsuit and talk of the Ali Act and concussions and all this stuff, like, is this a good time to sell if you're the UFC? If you can truly get a couple $1 billion, $4 billion for something that you bought for $2 million, is this the right time? Do you guys feel that way?
Yeah. I think it'd be an interesting time to do it, right? I mean, you could always say, oh, hold out for more, hold out for that $6 billion that he mentioned, or wherever the case goes. But to your point, I don't think that they're overly concerned about the lawsuit's potential damage long term. Ali Act legislation might get introduced this week, but who knows what kind of support that's going to garner, even though McCain has at least voiced some support for it. But I don't feel like it's heating up on the Hill necessarily. I live in D.C. I don't hear a lot of talk about it, so I'm not dismissing that, but it's not an immediate threat. I just feel like it's the $2 million, it's the $4 billion. To your point, Lorenzo might have some other ideas about his future rather than poring over the minutia of, what's Ronda tweeting or Conor Instagramming. Not so much Dana, because I think he's a little more hands-on in that regard. But if being more valuable, I mentioned this before. I feel like again, Real Madrid, 3.7 billion, 3.6 billion. You're at $4 billion. Like, when is enough enough? That is such a dramatic amount of money, not merely relative to what you initially had, but relative to other sports properties around the world. If that's not enough, you begin to risk that tipping point where, as research into CTE is done, could this end combat sports as we know? I don't think that it will, but certainly these are risks. So, long story short, is it the best time? I don't know, but it's certainly a very good time.
Yeah, I would say it's a really good time.
Yeah.
Because all these things that might potentially be roadblocks haven't really happened. At least we haven't seen. The other shoe has not dropped yet. We haven't seen, the concussion studies is in progress. Ali Act, nothing is really concrete. All these things that potentially could affect your business are still in progress, and at the same time, you've built or have seen the building of a couple of huge stars in McGregor and Rousey, and the sport itself is growing by leaps and bounds. It seemed like there was that whole plateau that happened when the sport was growing, and then all of a sudden it just seemed like the pay-per-views weren't doing so well, and then McGregor comes along, or Rousey comes along, and McGregor, and this is a time when the sport is doing really well, and if you're going to get out, you want to get out when your house is highly valued, as opposed to when they start noticing the roof is leaking.
Mm-hmm. And add to that just the fact, I mean, they're crossing things off the list for so long, and all of a sudden you get New York that's finally legal. You get all these things. You have the looming things ahead. You've got some things behind you. You're in that middle space right now where it seems like it might be a good time to do that because, like you said, there's so much looming and the uncertainty as the sport grows. There'll be new problems, but some of those problems are very big. And you're getting a lot of dissension from UFC fighters over not just like endorsement deals, but also just in general, pay, everything that kind of comes up, unionizing, all those types of things keep coming up and coming up. So there's a lot of weird stuff looming ahead, so I feel like they're in a quiet enough moment right now, even given all the stuff that's going on with UFC 200 and everything coming up, but I feel like they're in a quiet enough moment right now where it might make some sense. I agree that it's just an interesting time for them to be maybe seeking that out.
And it is important to note that this story has been lingering for so long. I remember when I was first working as a paid MMA media member, MMArated.com in 2008, Dana teased a big announcement, and everyone thought that Fox, if you recall back then, was buying the UFC. Then there was a story that WWE was going to buy the UFC, all kinds of rumors. It ended up being that Lorenzo was leaving Station Casinos and coming on full time, and everyone was like, what? In the end, business-wise, that might have been their biggest move, but for fans who want sexy news, it just didn't whet their appetite. So this has been going on for like 8 years or so. So we'll see what happens.
I was just going to say one thing that going all the way back when you were mentioning the whole Chinese, what was going on over there. You guys remember Rough China, like the Rough? They were trying to break in. Their big claim to fame was that they had got onto mainland China. That was what going to be their thing. But they were just so small potatoes in terms of how they were going to do it. They understood the big enterprise of getting 1 billion homes, households watching them, like 1 billion people in that country. I just feel like that can't be understated as well. When you really contemplate what a market where the birthplace of martial arts is in China, how that might, even if it's a partial interest, like you said, or a partial ownership that will help them get in those doors, I can't help but feel that that's like another jackpot waiting for them one way or another, even if it's just a partial sale, because I feel like personally that whole Chinese market, the whole country is like
completely
the
untouched.
most untapped resource out there right now.
It's the largest online population in the world, and some of the people who are looking to potentially buy either the UFC or a portion of it are the people who are not in control of telecom, but entertainment properties and technology that delivers entertainment and sports to mobile phones. You put 2 and 2 together and you think, oh, I see why this is going to work out.
I'm no real estate expert, but I do believe they say buy low, sell high. They bought it for very low.
Yes.
This could be selling pretty damn high. Do you guys feel, let's transition to UFC 198, which is this weekend. Do you guys feel like this story has hurt 198's momentum? Do you feel like less people are talking about 198? If these media tours were planned beforehand, Dana could have spent 10 minutes on Dan Patrick talking about Chris Cyborg and Verdum and the heavyweight title and 45,000. That's not really being done. Thursday, 48 hours before the event, do you feel like a card that is fantastic, top to bottom? We don't have to sing its praises anymore. It was hurt by Anderson being pulled out. That to me was one of the most intriguing matchups on the card. But do you feel that buzz for such a big card? 45,000 seater?
I think it probably tamped down on the number of, Varley Alves pledges to make good on best camp of career. Yeah, I mean, you got a little bit less of that.
Right.
But the truth is, people forget Ronda Rousey went to Brazil and sold a bunch of pay-per-view buys. That's because she's Ronda Rousey.
Yeah.
She did in Australia too. Absent her, what is the hook? Stipe Miocic is American, and he could not be a nicer guy, but he's not good at media. He's just not good at media. And Fabricio Verdum is, he's trilingual, but he's not really an American star in that regard. There's no real American hook. This is red meat for Brazil. That's what this is.
That's what you said on your show on Monday. You basically for a focalized effort for a specific area, you can't put together a bigger card with bigger stars and more compelling matchups and that sort of thing. And I feel like it was been under the radar the whole time. I feel like the outcry from the media has been like, man, why are we sleeping on this card the whole way up? But it's just one of those things. We have UFC 200, which was being put together sort of makeshift on the fly as things were happening, and we've been focused on that a lot. And then you have UFC 199 too, which is also a very good card. So I feel like those two things also kind of hurt it. But the whole card itself, in my mind, it seems like it's Brazil's. That's what it seems like. It belongs to Brazil, but we all get to enjoy it. But it's more based on what Brazil, that crowd that's going to be there and all that stuff. But
imagine a fight card losing Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
And it barely causing a ripple in the current. It just was, because we heard that news and it was like, okay, well, that's a bummer. Anderson Silva's out, but hey, look what's still there.
Although I will admit, I really love that fight because it felt like a fight that the UFC doesn't typically do, where they take this legend and former champion and they say, "Okay, Uriah Hall, this is your chance, man. This is your chance to step up." It was just
and combined with just Cyborg being able to fight, to see her finally in the octagon. There were so many weird, compelling storylines.
Isn't it a little surreal to see her a part of the whole fight? Like,
Just very quickly about the event. So first of all, sold 45,000 tickets.
Very quickly.
In the middle of an extraordinary economic downturn in that country.
Yeah.
There's a Zika virus outbreak. Their president got suspended today and is going to be impeached, it looks like. For them to, we know that they're scaling back their efforts there locally, but to the point that this is Brazil's thing. This is for Brazil, about Brazil. We are merely window shopping as a consequence, like almost literally. But I do feel like even with scaled back operations, they've done this before. When the first one back, whether it was the Okami versus Silva, it's when they go to Brazil, they like to make sure that they have an not all Brazil card, but it just feels like they make the American product of it completely go away.
This one though is the best card since that return to Brazil, 134. Like they watered that thing down.
Might be the best one ever. Yeah. For that country.
It seems like there was a time when and maybe it's jumping off Luke's point where you would go to Brazil to see these fight cards and it would be some Brazilian killer against the lamb, some American lamb, or some guy from somewhere else who was being put in there just getting slaughtered. And then you would, at the end of the night, you would look at Brazilian guy won, and they would just right down there, just play to the home crowd. This one has, two very well-known Brazilian fighters against each other in the Jacare versus Vitor. There's Demian Maia fighting a guy who's not going to lay down for him, and Matt Brown. I mean, they've got every one of those guys who's in there is fighting somebody who really can compete with them. There's no gimmies in this one. That's what makes this hard for me.
There's Cyborg versus Smith.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't sleep on Smith.
There are no gimme There are no men's fights that are gimmies.
There you go.
It tells you how far we've come, though, when you think like, wow, 45,000 seat venue that back in the day when they first went to Brazil, we had flirted with. Remember when Chael was going to fight Anderson Silva again in the rematch, and we were talking about this? We might have to bring him out with a phalanx of like security and all this stuff because we're worried about him and stuff. It's kind of crazy because that seemed like the biggest possible thing you could conceive of at the time was putting something in a soccer stadium and having these guys go at it like, and we were talking like, this is like Frazier, you know what I mean? We were talking in these big terms, and here's this card, 45,000 people are going to be there, and it has some of those big names involved in it. And we're talking about other things, but it just tells you, too, how far the sport has come, how our expectations have widened, I guess, as time has went on.
And it's in Curitiba, which is a famous place for martial arts in that country, and I guess MMA worldwide.
Yeah, and it's produced some of the best ever. What I liked about it also was that, or what I like about it is that symbolically, it could be almost Brazil's last stand for a while, in the sense that 134 was this celebration of Brazilian MMA and this explosion. This card, I mean, you look up and down that card. Now, Anderson Uriah could have been somewhat of a changing of the guard, but you look at Little Nog versus Patrick Cummins. Little Nog could lose that fight.
Patrick Cummins is practically Brazilian.
Yeah, he is at this point. Shogun Corey Anderson. Shogun can lose that fight. Verdum can lose his fight. I mean, we could be left. Cyborg is probably going to win, but we could be left with a card. Come Saturday night, Sunday morning, where like the Brazilian idols, as they like to call them, didn't fare all too well. And now you're left with one champion out of Brazil and Rafael dos Anjos. I mean, it's a very interesting time. Plus, they're scaling back. They're recognizing that they need to put bigger and better cards with bigger names in Brazil, as opposed to doing like 6 in a calendar year and
just 2014.
Just absolute craziness. So from that point, I want to transition over to the news about BJ Penn. BJ Penn is now fighting Cole Miller at UFC 199, which I think is such a great card. Like, you compare 199 to 99, UFC 99, that card in Germany that was kind of just there, like almost like a little speed bump on the way to 100. 199 is such a great card top to bottom. And that BJ Penn Dennis Siver fight, we've talked about it ad nauseum. It's not happening anymore. It's Cole Miller. And I want to ask you about that matchup. But the news coming out this week that it's going to be on the FS1 prelims, to me, it was shocking to see how many people poo-pooed this idea, how many people felt like it was disrespectful towards BJ, how it made no sense to have him not on the pay-per-view. That's what I got from Brendan Schaub to many others tweeting me. And I feel like there's sort of a disconnect with, like the old UFC and the prestige of being on pay-per-view and the new UFC and just looking at the numbers and who sees you more and where you're promoted more. Do you guys agree with a lot of these people online that it's disrespectful, that it's stupid, that it's a bad business, that it's promotional malpractice, to steal your phrase, by putting him on the prelims? Or
No, not at all. Not at all. Look, once you sign the contract to fight and you have an opponent, where you fight on the card, that's marketing. That really is. And it used to be not that way. I'll acknowledge that. There used to be that, remember when the UFC would have the title fight was always the main event. And if there were 2 title fights, it would always be the heavier fighters would fight in the main event, and then the lighter of the 2 title fights would be second, regardless of who was a star and who had more star power, who didn't. That's all gone away. Nowadays, we'll have non-title fights, or they'll call them interim title fights, as a main event, and a real title fight as a co-main. The idea that you're putting this guy on a different part of the card, to me it's marketing, and to put him on the free part of the card in order to perhaps draw some people's interest, and maybe they'll go and buy the pay-per-view. That's obviously what they're trying to do, and whether you think that's wise or whether it's a misstep is fine, but to say that it's disrespecting BJ Penn, I think is just ludicrous.
I just feel like it's par for the course of what they've been doing with the every card these days is basically 3 cards, right? Like there were escalation towards some kind of main event of each portion of that, and I feel like that this fight makes sense in that way. And you go back to, I think it was Uriah Faber was one of the guys who was doing that, like that last prelim as the headliner of the prelims, and it was sort of funny at the time, but you didn't have to wear Reebok at that time. Well, the first time he did it, he was able to sort of showcase his brands, and he knew that that was more valuable to get that exposure than if he was to appear on the pay-per-view card. I'm not sure if guys think of that anymore. I mean, so then you get into, you know, what does it make sense in terms of the ratings and things like that? I feel like that's the perfect fight in some ways because BJ Penn, where he's been, you know, and how he's coming back and stuff, it's just that kind of allure. There's a little bit of a cringe thing going on with it too. You're not sure what you're going to get. And he's not fighting. It's not like he's looked good and he's going to fight one of these big name guys either. So it's Cole Miller. I just feel like that made sense to me. When I think it was you who reported, wasn't it you who?
Yes.
Okay, but it was to me it made sense that it was like it was going to be that last.
You disagree?
Well, do I think it's disrespectful they put him on the prelims? Not at all. You know, look. This is all bonus time for BJ Penn.
Right.
You can make a very, very credible case he shouldn't even be fighting at all. But we're giving him this, what do you want to call it, second, third chance, whatever you want to describe it, and they're doing it under the auspices of Greg Jackson. We talked about it ad nauseum. So, okay. But this idea that, like, he naturally deserves a main card slot, no, you can work your way up. If this is a tune-up fight, not to disrespect Cole Miller, was originally Dennis Seaver. I thought the Dennis Seaver fight was explicitly a tune-up fight. If that's what that is, then tune your way up. I have no problem with that at all. I just don't buy the argument that more people watch on FS1 than on pay-per-view. Sure, if Uriah Faber is headlining a pay-per-view and he doesn't sell pay-per-views very well, but he can draw a free crowd, that might be the case for him. Do we really think that the people who I don't even know, who headlined FS1 when Jones and Cormier fought the first time? Do we remember?
UFC 182?
Yes. Right. The defense rests, Your Honor. There might be, what was it, let's say on the high end, 800,000 buys. That's not 800,000 people watching. There's multiples of people watching. There's internal research in the UFC to suggest for every pay-per-view buy, it's 10 people. All the bars are packed. If you've ever thrown a UFC party, when do your casual fans show up? When the pay-per-view card shows up.
Not always.
You're not suggesting that more people watch the pay-per-view than watch the prelims on Fox. That's ludicrous.
I agree.
That's ludicrous.
Way more people watch on average.
More people are going to pay $60 to watch it on.
I can tell you almost definitively more people watch the pay-per-view.
Absolutely wrong.
I mean, the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, what numbers?
The numbers, the Nielsen ratings, as opposed to the pay-per-view numbers.
Who was on the prelim card for Ronda Rousey when she fought Betch Kahea? Who was the headliner at FS1?
It's not the point.
That's not the point.
It is the point. You're asking who watched, where were more eyeballs drawn? That or that? You think the main event was...
Here,
you're arguing who's the bigger star.
No, I'm not arguing who's the bigger star. We know she's a bigger star. She's at the top of the card. I'm saying which had more humans watching their activity at that time. Ronda Rousey by a million miles. I don't buy that at all. I don't buy that at all.
You're taking, I think, the outlier. If you look at UFC,
I just gave you Jones Cormier.
That's another outlier.
No.
OSP Jones. Did
I not start this conversation off with Uriah Faber selling poor pay-per-views? I can believe it makes sense for him in that particular case. Yes, if Mighty Mouse is a headlining pay-per-view, get on FS1. I can buy that.
There you go.
But if anyone is selling 500,000 pay-per-view buys or more, you're talking about people in groups watching. And the idea that the Nielsen ratings can match that is fundamentally not true. I don't buy that at all.
Do you think 199 pay-per-view, as good as it may be, does 700,000-800,000?
We'll have to see what it does.
Do you think?
I don't know.
Do you think?
I don't know.
What's your prediction?
I don't like those fights, so I have a jaundiced view of it.
So there you go. So BJ Penn will probably be seen by more people than the pay-per-view.
It's possible.
It's absolutely.
It's possible in that circumstance. I'm just trying to point out to you that the idea that generally there are more people watching on FS1, I don't buy that. I fundamentally don't buy that.
I vehemently disagree, and I appreciate your passion. I feel like there are three.
Ask Zuffa how many people watch per pay-per-view buy on their own research, and what you will find. Will they tell us that? Well, years ago, I was told it was 10 for every purchase. Okay. 10. Now, just do the math.
I also question that.
I don't know if.
Okay. Even if it's half that.
I've been at places where there's been 10 people watching the fight, but I've also watched a lot of them by myself.
Sure.
So maybe
I watched them all by myself.
So
there you go.
Do the math. It's not going to be 10.
We're talking about on average. Even if 10 is high, let's say even if it's 5. Again, it is contingent upon the co-main event, who the stars are. It's not going to be in every case. But that it's also not going to be true in every case. That the FS1 prelims are more people, that seems to me ludicrous to say.
I would be comfortable betting my life savings that more people will watch Damian Maia versus Matt Brown on Saturday than Fabricio Verdum versus Stipe Miocic.
In that particular circumstance, but only...
but you're talking about the one outlier.
You're trying to tell me FS1 is by rule going to be bigger.
No, on average. I'm saying on average. I'm saying on average.
We'll have to look at that. We'll have to look over all
the only time I would give you maybe a little bit of a righteousness on this would be when FS1 is up against something big. If it's whatever,
Baseball, NHL.
a big. Yeah, and not necessarily the NHL, but NBA playoff games, NBA finals, or some pro football, or something where a lot of eyeballs who would normally be watching this on free TV, because it is essentially free TV. I know you got to pay your cable bill; nothing's free, but it's essentially free TV. People are going to watch that stuff. People who are casuals. You got to be a little bit more than a casual fan to fork over $60 or be part of a group that's going to fork over $60
every single month. And sometimes twice a month.
Yeah.
To me, there are 3 prime spots, 3 desired spots on a card. If I'm a UFC fighter, these are the spots I'm looking for. The main event, that's a no-brainer. Everyone wants to be the main event. Everyone wants it to say UFC 197.
If you really want to be seen, it's not the main event.
No. This is my point. 197, Johnson versus Cormier. You're attached to that card.
Yeah.
You're doing all the interviews.
You're on the poster. And
you're getting a trickle-down effect. The second most desired spot, in my opinion, is the headliner of the FS1 prelims. Okay, more people are going to talk about BJ Penn versus Cole Miller than Max Holloway versus Ricardo Lamas. That's just a fact. That's the opener of the pay-per-view. More people are going to talk about it and see that fight. In my opinion,
because it's BJ Penn, not because it's Max Holloway and Ricardo Lamas.
Same with, I think.
What's the third one?
Okay, the third one.
You guys say Fight Pass?
The Fight Pass one. Because if you look at social media, if you look at what they do on their website, if you look at Fight Pass itself, they promote the shit out of that fight. Honestly. Okay, let me ask you guys a question.
May
29th. It's true though, and I'm also starting to get tired, and I'm at fault here. I asked this question to all these guys, like, you feel disrespected that you're on the Fight Pass prelims? We need to get past this. Why? Okay, look at the May 29th card.
I was the one who's in favor of the lightweight title on Fight Pass.
Yes.
I think that's good.
Okay, but I'm just talking about like when it's a tiered system, as you mentioned. Look at the May 29th card. That's headlined by Cody Garbrandt versus Thomas Almeida, right? Can you tell me what is the featured FS1 prelim, if you will, on that card? Can you tell me what's the 4th fight on the main card on that card?
I can't.
I bet you guys, if you think for just a second, what's the featured Fight Pass prelim on that card?
Oh, Aljamain Sterling and Brian Caraway.
Boom. They have been promoting that thing. They have been putting it out. They have been tweeting. They make a little poster for it. They have done videos with Caraway and Sterling. They're actually getting more behind and maybe this is telling of their relationship with Fox, but they get behind those Fight Pass prelims way more than any of the FS1 prelims. So if I'm a fighter, I'm actually shooting for, and let's not forget, you mentioned Reebok. In this day and age, you don't lose any sponsorship dollars if you're on this card or that card or that card. Back in the day, I could understand if someone was like, damn, I'm on the prelims, I'm not going to get that pay-per-view money. I'm not going to get that spike money. Now, you get the exact same no matter where you are on the card. You literally cannot get any more if you're on FS1 as opposed to the pay-per-view as opposed to the Fight Pass prelim. So it really doesn't matter business-wise. So why not go where the numbers say the most amount of people are watching? And the numbers say the most amount of people are watching the FS1 prelims on average.
But when you take it down to the Fight Pass part of it, that is an even more condensed.
Yes, but you are getting promoted.
Crowd.
You are getting promoted by UFC.com, by
it's
Twitter,
good
by
for
Dana's Twitter.
Your quote unquote your brand, if you want to say. But in terms of, if you were talking pure numbers, in terms of how many people are watching, that number is a lot smaller.
There's different things at play. UFC 197. Jones OSP did not do, according to the numbers, great on pay-per-view. I can't tell you. I think it was the Sergio Pettis, Chris Kalidas fight that was the featured FS1 prelims, I think.
Sounds right.
But I do remember what the featured Fight Pass prelim was because they brought those guys to Media Day. They had them on the stage.
Right.
It was Walt Harris versus Cody East because of looking for a fight. So you know what I'm saying? They're actually getting behind the third fight on the card. Remember Poirier and Duffy? Those guys got promoted a ton prior to 195, just as much as anyone on the main card. So I actually feel like the times are changing, and I couldn't believe that people had this approach that like this was disrespectful to BJ, that this was bad business. To me, you want to put a guy that's going to lead you into the pay-per-views, that's going to get people watching. Hopefully people come to your party and say, oh wait, BJ's on the prelims?
They're not coming.
Yeah, well, that's a different story. But you know what I'm saying? And you'll have that trickle-down effect, and I think more people will watch.
I mean, we can't be more disrespectful than his last fight, even though it was a headliner. He was going up against, remember the Sunday night?
Yeah.
His last fight against Frankie Edgar. I mean, to me, that seemed more disrespectful in the sense like, how are they putting this guy in his last potential fight on a Sunday night when nobody seemed to care at that point?
It was like sticking around at the party a little too long. Now, I feel like the Dennis Seaver fight was tailor-made for his comeback. The Cole fight to me seems a little tricky. Like, I know Cole Miller is no world beater as far as like being a former champion or anything like that, but I don't know if I love that matchup for BJ. Considering his height, his reach. He's fairly you know what I mean? Like Dennis Seaver felt like the perfect guy who was kind of on the way down, like BJ could win. get his mojo back. This one, on a month's notice, I don't know. Do you guys? When I heard that, I was like,
I'm with you on that, because Cole Miller, if you really look back at what he's done, I guess he had an unusual 2015. You know, the eye poke in his last fight against Ehlers, and then I think he'd lost to Holloway, right? Like that was the fight before, and then he was supposed to have that McGregor fight before then in 2014 that fell through with his thumb injury and all that. I feel like he's kind of hit this strange part in his career, but he's always rebounded. He's been around for a long time. He's always rebounded from his adversities pretty well. So I feel like he's in that moment where I feel like he's chomping at the bit probably to get in there. I feel like this could be a worse matchup for BJ Penn. That was the first thing that occurred to me, kind of looking at that.
I was sort of thinking of it the way, I think it was on our last show, Luke was talking about the Holly Holm getting matched with Shevchenko, and that was, you know, not a huge name fighter that she was going to be up against, but someone who really who's going to challenge her in a big way. And I guess I was thinking about that with this fight here, that BJ Penn certainly is, I would imagine, has a good shot of winning this fight, but also this is a guy who has some advantages, who he's going to be fighting against, and will bring some things that are going to be challenging for him. But you know what? You're a big boy, BJ. If you want to stay in the game, you know, you
have to beat the Cole Millers.
You got to be able to beat somebody at that level in order to move up to the pay-per-views, right?
Yes, where everyone's watching.
Everybody's watching.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I don't know if Cole Miller's going to win. I don't know if BJ's going to win, but Cole Miller is a tougher challenge than Dennis Seaver in a lot of ways, you know. Maybe he's not the physical kind of powerhouse that Dennis Seaver is, but he's got tremendous defensive jiu-jitsu, at least, you know, maybe to nullify what BJ Penn can do. And you might say, well, BJ Penn's record in jiu-jitsu is phenomenal, and I wouldn't be here to disagree with you, but he just looked so bad in his last fight. Again, that was against Frankie Edgar, and he was playing his own guard. I just mean, there's a lot of questions about BJ Penn, and Cole Miller's jab has come a long way, and his guard is really good. He's the only guy I think I know in MMA, at least UFC, ever to hit a Holeta sweep, which is like a super esoteric sweep. He's got some game, you know, and he's, I mean, if you're Cole Miller, you got to be super motivated for this one. You know, he lost out on that Conor McGregor fight, and he's had some tough fights. This is a great way to get a big name win. So again, I don't make your own mind up if he will. Maybe I lean BJ Penn just a little bit, but this is a much tougher challenge.
The thing about BJ Penn is now fighting under the auspices of the Jackson Winklejohn camp. What are they best known for? It's the game plan. And so they're working with this guy saying, okay, you're going to fight against this little squat German guy with short arms, a little alligator, and now you're going to fight against this guy who's like a giant, and he's got big arms, and he fights great on the ground. I mean, if you were to look at Seaver and Miller and think, you know, try to find two fighters who are more different from those two, you're going to have a hard time.
BJ doesn't care. Jens Pulver, Machida, it doesn't matter, right?
Like
those guys
anywhere. I'd like to look at the history books and see how many times a fighter who was a cast member on Tough fought a coach on that season. Because if you recall, Cole Miller was on Tough 5 on Team Pulver, and Penn was opposite. I wonder how many times that's happened. I know a lot of people don't care about these things, but these are the things that I think about. Speaking of Tough, that's my segue. And I understand that you've said on this show many times, and honestly, it's come to that place for me as well. It's like, how can you care about something that you don't watch? And it's sort of disingenuous. You've said that about Tough, and I respect that. But I just want to ask you guys this question about the news that came out about the new Tough season. So the UFC announced yesterday that the new Tough season is going to be 16 flyweights, no tryout, and they're going to go out and sign these flyweights from different organizations, and the winner of that is going to fight for the belt in December. They also announced that Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo, two guys who, you know, very recently have lost to Demetrius Johnson, are going to try to coach these guys to fight each other, but then eventually kind of like send them off and prepare them for DJ. To me, I was like, yeah, I get that the tryouts, it's just a little too daunting. You're not going to find 32 flyweights, you know, major flyweights to come on the show. Just get 16 guys and put them in the house. So I get that. I still sort of feel like they should just do it from the guys who are in-house, give them that opportunity, let the Ryan Benoits of the world get that shine and let them get that opportunity. But to me, if I'm Joseph Benavidez and Henry Cejudo, like, what a strange spot that is to be in, right? I mean, you lost to this guy, Benavidez, twice, and now you're going to help others prepare to beat him? I mean, that just, I don't know. If I'm them, I'm not really that excited about that opportunity. Am I reading into this a little too much? Like, it
exactly
feels.
What occurred to me.
Yeah.
It's like you're going to groom guys to do something you couldn't do, that you failed at, and get them ready to go. It's just a bizarre setup.
It's the ultimate. It feels like you have enshrined in his position that the torch has already been passed.
Yes,
Exactly.
it's so strange.
That's exactly right.
I couldn't believe it. I thought they were going to go with some like middleweight or something, like not the actual guys who lost to him.
And think about, you know, Benavidez is the second best flyweight in the world. I don't think anybody would very few people would argue with that. He is a really excellent fighter. Cejudo got torched by Mighty Mouse, but he's a real good fighter. Where are they going to find guys who aren't already in the UFC who are going to have any kind of shot? I mean, I heard from good authority that Sid Finch Jr. is going to make he's got an MMA career brewing, and he's the guy.
That one went right over my head.
Sorry.
What am I missing here?
Never mind.
I don't know
Who is Sid Finch Jr.?
Look up Sid Finch.
Okay, is he some prospect out of Russia?
He was a superstar nobody heard of.
Okay,
but anyway,
is that an old man joke?
You can figure
Okay,
it out.
I'm going to go Google.
On your social media thing.
Yeah, that's right.
See if you can figure it out.
Okay, yes.
But I mean, come on, where are they going to find guys who are, this is the quintessential, show me something. I don't know how they're going to find guys. I mean, if they were to get rid of the top 10 of flyweights and then start with number 11 down, they're not going to find a guy there who's even going to belong in the cage. If they even stay with the top 10. So, I mean, I don't know.
Bizarre setup. There just aren't that many 125-pounders.
Right.
And when you take guys like Cejudo, both guys very active and still in their primes, right? Like, they're still pretty much right there. They're active fighters. They're relevant fighters. And they're going to be coaching guys that potentially, if one of them does rise up, they might be facing two. I mean, it's weird. I didn't expect to hear that. I didn't know how they were going to run it, but I didn't expect it to be two guys grooming guys to go up and do the job that they themselves couldn't do. It was like this. That was the very first thing that struck me, and I'm not sure. Maybe we'll watch it and it'll make sense, but right now it doesn't seem to make that much sense to me.
The silver lining is, I'm down with seeing Benavidez and Cejudo.
Yes,
that was a good fight.
They've had a history. They've gone back and forth.
I'll like to see that.
Look, I'm no fan of tough, but there's no easy answers at flyweight right now.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they could have done this better, but they could have done it worse. At least they hit the reset button once on this already, if not twice in some ways.
So I guess it tells you the lengths they have to go to find Demetrius Johnson,
That's true,
somebody
right?
to fight.
Crazy.
I mean,
that is
Crazy what they
crazy.
gotta do.
One last quick thing I wanted to ask you guys about. Last week on the show, we talked about Gilbert Melendez, how he has been quiet. Well, thankfully, we got a hold of him. And he came out this week and said that, when talking about his PED suspension being out for a year, I messed up. I'm sorry. Didn't want to really go into it. Didn't want to go into specifics. But I said afterwards that was good enough for me. He fessed up. He said, I'm sorry. And I've had a year to pay this, crime, whatever, and I just want to move on now. Some people afterwards, some fans were tweeting and things like, no, you let him off the hook. Like, why did he do this? Well, my response to that was like, I know why he did it. They're called PEDs for a reason, performance-enhancing drugs. He wanted to enhance his performance. I don't really need to know exactly why he was trying to get like a better jab or quicker. Was that enough for you guys? Like, is it enough a year later to say does this change at all the way now that you know that Gilbert Melendez admitted that he was trying to gain an edge, trying to gain an advantage, and knowingly that it wasn't a tainted supplement, it wasn't that excuse. Does that change the way you view Gilbert Melendez, considered one of the great warriors of this sport?
No.
No.
Not at all. I think a lot of people's heroes have used in the past, a lot, especially in the...
Not all have been caught or admitted.
Oh, yeah. Some of the things you hear in this sport, a lot of people's heroes have used,
Sure.
okay, and some just got away with it. And for me, I don't think what he did is okay. I've defended guys who use supplements. I think Lyoto Machida's still getting a raw deal, but this is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Look, he doesn't owe me anything.
Right.
He owes whatever his contract says, and maybe to his close family friends if he was not honest with them in some capacity in his real life. He doesn't owe me anything except to obey the rules, and he suffered under the punitive side of them for disobeying them, and now he's back. Yeah, I'm good.
You're good, all right.
Yeah, I don't like it when a guy uses performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, it changes the way I look at him.
So it does, okay.
So that changes the way I look at him, absolutely. But we all have to move forward. And in my book, if you come out and you make an apology, and that apology does not include an excuse or, blaming somebody else or anything like that, but if you say, I'm sorry, I did something wrong, then we move on.
Okay.
Usually when guys are not very specific about what it is, they still err to the side of there's an excuse. You hear guys saying there's some kind of victim tone to what they're saying, like there's something weird or what's happening. I felt like with him, he erred to the side of, hey man, I was irresponsible, I got caught. I mean, that's how I took it, and I was like, it's refreshing, I guess. He didn't have to go in specifics to be refreshing in how he took accountability for what he did, because basically that's what he was telling you on your show was, I did something bad and I paid the price, and now I want to move on. I want to reprove that I'm the guy you hoped I was.
Yeah.
And that to me was good enough. Now, you're right. I mean, they're always, anybody who gets caught and they do these suspensions, and it's very much played out in the public like this. And, he didn't do himself any favors maybe by staying as quiet as he did during that whole period of time. But you'll always have a little bit of an asterisk next to their name. But for him, I mean, I don't know what else you could do. I don't know what would appease people. You've been caught. How else do you handle it? Do you go out and really just say, guys, I mean, maybe that would be more refreshing if he was just out there saying, like, I did this drug, trying to get this better. But that it just seems unnecessary. You know
TMI.
what I mean?
TMI, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what that stands for?
No.
Too much information.
Too much information.
We don't need all that information, but if you just say, I'm sorry.
If someone's been doping for years,
Yeah.
like a Lance Armstrong type, and even he got railroaded, not in the sense that he wasn't guilty, but there's a lot of other people doing what he was doing that didn't have to answer for it. But if someone's going to be doping that long in that kind of way, there is some kind of public benefit to understanding the ways in which he was doping. But if Gilbert Melendez was just like privately using just to get an edge, because he thought he needed it against Eddie Alvarez, again, that doesn't make it okay. But that's like raking him over the coals for details about how he administered this. I don't know what we gain exactly. So there you go.
It's good to pieces together.
Yeah.
He's 32 years old. He's in his 30s. He's been going into that fight. He's been 1 and 2 in the UFC. You know what I mean? Like you could put the pieces together and sort of
There's a
understand
lot of
it.
pressure in Mexico. A fight. This was the two former champions. There was a lot going on.
Athletes always have a potential, not a potential to use. They're always going to have an incentive to use. They're always going to have virtue to keep them from doing that, of course. But they're always going to have an incentive to use. This is not a mystery of life,
It's amazing how forgiving the public can be if you just sort of come out and say, what we believe to be the truth. I love this episode. This is one of my favorite episodes in a while, and most importantly,
I'm telling you, I'm right about pay-per-views. I'm telling you.
It sucks though because most of our audience pays attention during the first half of the show, not the second half. This happened in the second half of the show.
That's true. What I want to say was I'm so proud of us of the fact that we did not talk about Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor.
Let's do that now.
Yeah, let's do that right now. We can spend the whole hour on that great fight.
We should do MMA Hour overtime. We'll do like 5 minutes of the dumbest topic of the week, and we can all make fun of Chuck.
Yes.
Okay, stay tuned for that.
The same, but this time on camera.
Well done. We didn't do it. How about that? I'm sure the internet is very happy. For now, though, we have to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching the show. A great weekend of MMA coming up. Of course, UFC 198 and Bellator. A lot of things on the cutting room floor this week. We didn't get to a lot of our topics, but Bellator has a solid card as well. Of course, headlined by King
Do they have
Muhammad.
a solid card?
Okay, a solid main event.
All right, there you go.
It has been hit by injuries.
Not their fault. He got decimated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, a solid main event. Fine. 8 to 10 on Spike, and then you got the pay-per-view. So that's going up against the FS1 prelims. Very interesting, which should be very much
don't know what to
watched.
make of that.
I would never compete with that.
Yes, and then the pay-per-view UFC 198 on Saturday night. We're back next week to talk about all that and who knows what else, but we say goodbye for now. That is Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Again, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the fights.